Anyone?
All right, folks. All right, let's get rolling here. Now, we don't have, I know it seems like we have several questions. I think we got about 7 questions left, less than actually 6. We'll sort of cover those in like a big bunch. So I think we'll probably finish up just a little bit early today. However, I will say this. I had looked at what I had left, and you guys, we got through a little bit more in here than we did the other classes. So I decided that instead of trying to rush you through the exit slip, that I would just let you do that tomorrow. And so it sets us up for tomorrow. That's really the only big thing that we've got. So I'm not going to hand any papers back today. I'll hand all that stuff back tomorrow. You'll basically need 3 things to ensure best chance of success on the exit slip. You'll need the packet back. You had all the different documents. So hopefully, unless you were super sick, you've got all those back, or you already turned that in. The jigsaw front and back, which again, unless you were sick, that should be turned in. And then finally, these questions, on which there's going to be several items on the exit slip here. So what I'll have you do with these questions is once we're done with them today, you can turn them into the basket if you like. I can be honest with you, they won't be graded by class tomorrow. So when you're done with that exit slip, you'll need to make sure that they get put back in the basket. If you would rather just keep them with you tonight, that's fine too. Fairly certain, we'll definitely be here tomorrow. I kind of feel like we're going to be here full day again tomorrow. That might be our last one for a couple days, I don't know, but we should be good to go to get that quiz done. Right? Now, where we left off yesterday, we had been talking about, why the progressive era got its name, and a lot of that was obvious. But what I had talked about with this is that for some Americans, progress came in the form of, the expansion of the country. And we went through those 2 vocab terms: imperialism. This guy.
Imperialism.
Is that the word? Isolationism. Wait, who would have come back on? What was it yesterday? Some person.
It was one of the best.
No, Rutherford Hayes. Rutherford Hayes. Hayes sucks. All right, he's moved on. All right. We're stuck on isolationism now. But anyway, we had those 2 vocab terms. I put like a short version up here on the board, just remembering that if a country is imperialist, then it's actively trying to build an empire. It's going overseas and taking over territory. Great Britain is a great example of that. If a country is isolationist, then it's really just focused on that country and that country alone, not too concerned about colonies or building an empire or anything like that. And so the argument that I had made yesterday was that during the progressive era, the United States was definitely, I think, an imperialist country. We really are actively working to build an American empire. And yesterday I gave you the example of Alaska and talked a little bit about that. And so if I'm correct, we should be ready to start with question 6, right?
Yep.
Okay. So if you can remember yesterday, Alaska, William Seward, he kind of got made fun of for this. They called it Seward's Folly, Seward's Icebox. At least that was until they discovered what? Gold. Yeah, gold. Then all of a sudden it seemed like this really great idea. With Hawaii, it's a completely different story. All right. At no point is anyone going to get made fun of for picking up Hawaii. All right. Great story with Hawaii is that it is, air quote, discovered in the 1770s by Great Britain. And I say quotes around discovered because there were people living there. Like, the Europeans discovering America. That's a load of crap. So there are people living there. It's just that the British land there, and they take it over. They fly the British flag, and they name that island chain the Sandwich Islands. And it is going to be called the Sandwich Islands for a long time. I mean, up to the point where I can remember, as I was doing some of my undergraduate study at Ball State, that we looked at some maps, and these weren't super old maps. I mean, these were like late 1800s maps, where you would still see it labeled Sandwich Islands. Hawaii is a pretty recent name. They were called that not because of, not like the natives showed up and offered them, a ham sandwich. Welcome, British, here's turkey. No, it was named after the Earl of Sandwich. It was an actual person back in England. He's a royal, he's a noble. He is, however, the person who gave us the first sandwich, which I feel like is the most underwhelming invention of all time. He just took the meat and put it on bread. And then I don't know if he forced his workers to acknowledge his greatness. Sandwich, right? But anyway, that's the term they give Hawaii. The United States is going to really start kind of taking this area over by the mid to late 1800s. And what we're going to see is we're going to see this huge flock of American farmers who are going to move to the Sandwich Islands because it's really clear that they're going to be able to grow sugar in vast amounts and very easily in Hawaii. If you know anything about sugar, and I know that you're all experts in the sugar industry, you have to grow that in a certain climate. It's got to be hot, tropical, really nasty kind of climate. It's nice if you go there on vacation. If you live there, it wears on you a little bit. That's the only place you can grow sugar. A lot of that was grown in the Caribbean. Hawaii's on the same line of latitude. Grow sugar there. Talk about a cash crop. I mean, that's what question 6 is all about. Is what is that cash crop that Americans are growing there? And sugar is huge. And we can't undervalue that. It is as valuable as just about any other trade commodity in the world. Certainly at that point in time. In fact, there are so many farmers from the United States that move there that they become the power. Right? The Sandwich Islands, they have a queen, and she's up there. Her name is Liliuokalani. Which, any way you spell that's a fun thing to say. She is a formidable force. I mean, she's not just some, puppet that the United States has placed out there. She is, she's actively working to try to gain some sort of freedom for these islands. And, as you can see here, ultimately she's going to be unsuccessful. Those sugar farmers not only dominate the islands, they actually kick her out. They overthrow her. And for a period of time, Hawaii is going to, I don't even know what we would call it. I mean, it's like its own free sugar colony. All right, it doesn't have a leader necessarily. It's just a bunch of farmers who want to grow sugar and make money. That's the power. By the time we get into the 1890s, these farmers realize that this whole ruling thing, governing thing, a lot harder than it seems. And so they reach out to the United States and ask the United States to bring the Hawaiian Islands in, and that is what we do. Kind of like with Alaska. Not as a state, just simply going to bring it in as a territory. But once you do that, it's part of the United States. I give you Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is still an American territory. It is not a state, but the people that live there are every bit as much of an American as you and I. This is, I don't know if you guys remember, but Puerto Rico a year or two ago was just ravaged by a hurricane. You guys remember that at all? Hurricane Maria came through and just leveled parts of Puerto Rico. And there were parts of that island that were without power for close to a year. I mean, think about it. We've all been through power outage. Maybe even a whole night. Imagine not having power for almost a year. I mean, your cell phones wouldn't be able to charge. I think you'd struggle. I think you'd struggle without your phone. And listen, I don't judge. I think I would struggle too. Right? So, but yeah, so there was all this talk about, well, why are we sending so much help to Puerto Rico? We got Americans that need help, and I'm sitting over here saying, every bit as much as me. Right? So yeah, we help out our countrymen in need. Not a state, but they are a territory. Now, Hawaii and Alaska are great. We've got those lands. But the number one, I think, example of how the United States is an imperialist force at this time is in the form of this war. This tends to be a forgotten war. In fact, just out of curiosity, how many of you before coming in here had heard of the Spanish-American War? Not a lot of hands, right? I think part of the reason why we don't know much about it is that it is so ridiculously short. And when I mean ridiculously short, we're talking less than 9 months. All right, there were women who were still pregnant. 9 months is the course of a pregnancy. It's not even the length of an entire pregnancy. This was an incredibly short war. And it was an absolute woodshed beating by the United States. This was just a ridiculously simple, easy win for the United States. We're kind of jumping down here to question A. I've got these questions a little bit out of order, as I noticed that this morning. But what was the Spanish-American War called? Newspapers referred to it as a splendid little war. And I think, if you've got newspapers that are writing about American soldiers overseas in war, and the only thing they're talking about is that it's splendid, I mean, that tells you how easy of a win this really was. Give you a little bit of background here on what got us into this conflict. A lot of it revolves around Cuba. That's an island that I think most of you have probably heard of. It's an independent country today, and we don't have the greatest relationship with them today. But back then, it was great. It was great. Sugar's being grown there. They've got a lot of tobacco coming from there. And as you can see here, even though Cuba is owned and controlled by the Spanish, the Cubans are exporting 98% of their goods to the United States. All right? And the United States is a little bit frustrated here because every time we trade with Cuba, we got to pay Spain a little something. They've got this middleman in there, and they would love to get the Spanish out of there. Well, fortunately for, I guess, the United States, the Cuban people eventually become fed up, and not all that different from what we went through with the British. All right, they get to the point where they are fed up with being controlled by somebody else, and they rebel. And the United States is excited about this. All right, we want to get there. We would love to send American troops to Cuba and get involved in this conflict so we can, maintain our relationship with Cuba. Problem is Americans are not all that enthused about sending troops to this tropical island when they don't really understand what they're going to get out of it. It's not like Cuba attacked us. It's not like Spain attacked us. So why do we need to go down there and possibly cost American lives? So what we start to see is the government and newspapers are involved in this in a big way. They really try to get the American people worked up. Let's get you ticked off, man. Let's get you emotional. This is what we call yellow journalism. When a news source, a newspaper, today it could be the television news, whatever it may be, but they blow things out of proportion. They sensationalize stuff. They really exaggerate what is going on to try to get you worked up. Now, I'll give you an example here. This was a newspaper, all right? And this is the New York Journal. And so imagine, you know, you're in New York City and you're reading this newspaper, and the headline, there are Spanish ships on your coast. I took off Spanish and I'll take it over the line. There are Spanish ships on your coast. No, there's not. Right? But what the newspaper is betting on is that you're not going to then walk down to the coast and be like, I don't see any ships. They're assuming that you're going to just accept what is being written. So, you know, look, we better get in this. We better get in this fight because the Spanish are right off our coast. We've got Americans that are dying in the folds of Old Glory. You might know what Old Glory is? Yeah, that's a nickname for the flag. We've got Americans who are dying thanks to the Spanish. And they're dying wrapped up in the American flag. I mean, it's like this like soap opera style journalism that's really meant to get you feeling it. Like, oh my God, the Spanish are off our coast. We better get in this. We better fight. There are Americans dying wrapped up in flags. We can't have that. So that's, you know, that's kind of how yellow journalism works. And, you know, certainly as we get closer to 1898, which is the year that this war is fought, boy, Americans are just about there. They're pretty angry. They're pretty much ready to roll. They just need that one last little push to support us going to war. They get it. As it turns out, the United States Navy, you know, largely just to protect the trade shipments that are coming out of Cuba, has a naval ship in the port of Havana, Cuba. Biggest city in Cuba. Today it's the capital city of Cuba. And we have this naval ship parked in that harbor. One night, it explodes. And I mean, it sinks to the bottom of Havana Harbor, where it is still today. And immediately, as you can see in the newspaper up here, immediately, same New York Journal, destruction of the ship was the work of an enemy. I mean, they're offering $50,000. If you can help find who might have done this, as you can see here, 258 American sailors went down with the ship. And then here, I think this is the key. Navy is unanimous that the ship was destroyed on purpose. So the prevailing opinion here, and try this on. This was so widely accepted, and it was accepted as the what must have happened all the way up until fairly recently. I mean, you know, I'm not that old, right? Please?
No, you're young as
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Whatever. Anyway, it wasn't that long ago that I was a junior sitting in U.S. history. And I remember Mr. Morgan teaching about the Maine explosion. And it was taught that the Spanish had floated a series of mines out into Havana Harbor. You guys know what a mine is, right? Usually they would almost be like a floating tennis ball almost, you know. And it was an explosive, and if your ship touched it, boom. And that's what he's teaching. And so for a long time, that's what I just assumed had happened, is that the USS Maine had struck a mine, and boom, it sinks. And that, and it's like the Pearl Harbor, that is what brings us into this war. Now, what is interesting is that within the last decade, divers have gone down to that wreckage, naval divers. And what they have found is that the explosion was caused by a faulty boiler. I mean, these old naval ships were like old big steamships. They had these big boilers to create the steam. So apparently there was something wrong with one of the boilers, and boom, it exploded. It was an accident, and if you're going to blame anybody, it's sort of our fault, right? I mean, we built the ship. The Spanish did nothing. But that's not what was told. And, you know, you want to get Americans into a war effort, you attack us. Kind of like remember the Alamo, remember the Maine becomes the yell here. that we have American troops in Cuba, in Puerto Rico. We do not have American troops in Spain. No one is going to fight in Spain. There is no battle fought in the United States. It's all fought in the Caribbean, and it's really, really fast. And honestly, I mean, it's such a quick war that if we were to identify one thing that stands out about this war, it is this guy. This is when Teddy Roosevelt really makes his name. As you can see, I'm going to turn the one light on. Now, there. All right. I just feel like it's really dark. You know, this is where he makes his name. Now, Teddy Roosevelt, he's people know who he is. You know, he comes from a pretty wealthy family. But this guy was really sick as a kid. I love reading about Teddy Roosevelt. He was a super sick kid. As he grew up, you know, he just wasn't healthy. And the older he got, he committed himself to working out. And he sort of built himself into this, like, I am all that is man. Macho man Teddy Roosevelt. And so this war breaks out. He thinks, this is my chance to make a name. He puts together a volunteer group of soldiers. These are his guys. They call themselves the Rough Riders. And they go to Puerto Rico. And the famous story is how the Rough Riders took the Battle of San Juan Hill, which is really funny because the way that the story was told, you know, there was this giant mountain in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And on the top of it was this large Spanish fort that the Americans had to take or they wouldn't be able to win. And so Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders, they rode their horse uphill both ways, you know, which is a feat on its own. They got to that fort, they easily defeated the Spanish. In reality, it was a hill, kind of like a bump in the earth. And the big giant fort was a little brick building where there were something like 35 Spanish ships. But that didn't sound all that exciting. In reality, you know, the story doesn't quite match. We got a photograph here of the Rough Riders on top of San Juan Hill. Can you spot Teddy? Anybody feel like they can spot Teddy? Where do you think he is, Ethan? Go up and point. You can do it, Ethan. That's it. There you go. Yeah, right? He's got the I think the glasses are going to give him away. Anybody else notice anything else about this group that I think that kind of stands out, that's unique about the groups? Usually, I think, fairly surprising to students. Patty? I think that's sidearms and stuff. All right, you know, Gabby's on the right track here. There are African Americans in this unit, which is a big deal considering that in 1898 the United States Army was not integrated. But remember, this was a volunteer unit that Roosevelt put together. He couldn't care less who you are or what race you were, as long as you were willing to fight. So that, you know, this actually becomes kind of a stepping stone to integrating the Army. So that's a big deal there. Roosevelt comes back to the United States a hero, the hero of San Juan Hill, and is immediately put and as William McKinley's running mate. That's how he kind of becomes vice president. Okay? Just to finish this up, the war ends in December, started in March. That's what we're talking about, pretty quick war. And in this peace treaty, Spain gives everything they own to the United States. This includes Puerto Rico. So we've had Puerto Rico as an American territory since 1898. We also got the Philippines. There will be a period of time when the Philippines is not an independent country. It is simply just a part of the United States. Okay? So this is a big moment for us in being able to step forward and become a respected world power. All right, let's move to the back and let's talk about Teddy and kind of finish this up here. All right. Now, the first question about Teddy. The rest of the day is all about Teddy Roosevelt. Okay. The first question here is simply asking you for some noteworthy, I think some interesting notes about Teddy Roosevelt, as president. The first one is, I think, up here, right? how he becomes president. As popular as he is not elected to be president. All right, he is going to get that office because his predecessor is going to be assassinated. Now, he immediately becomes incredibly popular. People love this guy. I mean, he's got this personality that people really dig, and he's got these great stories. One of my favorite Teddy Roosevelt stories is that he was getting ready to go out and give a speech, and as he was getting ready to get into his car, somebody came right up to him and shot him right in the chest. Now, that didn't work so well for McKinley. But Roosevelt not only survived the gunshot, he actually went up and gave the speech. He went up and he gave the speech. Now, he shortened it. The speech was ridiculously long. In fact, the speech was so long, he had it in his coat pocket that when the bullet came at him, the speech slowed it down enough. I mean, it did get into him, but it didn't do the damage that it would have if his speech hadn't been there under his jacket. So he's got this speech in hand. It has a hole through it. He gives the speech. He shortens it. At the end of the speech, he famously said, "Folks, I've got more to say, but if it's okay with you, I was actually shot before, just before the speech, and I need to go to the hospital." Well, I do not like the guy. That's great. So people just eat this guy up. They love this guy. What I think also stands out is he's really young. I don't know if he looks like it in the picture, but when he becomes president in 1901, he's only 43. I mean, for reference, I am 37. Donald Trump is the oldest president we've ever had elected, and he's in his late 70s. So 43 is pretty young. You can't be president until you're 35. So he's in fact the youngest person we've ever had to become president of the United States. Really, really young guy. I think that maybe helps with some of his popularity. He is, like I said, he's this larger-than-life figure, and he really loves, the outdoors. And he's got this idea that what the United States needs to do is they need to kind of seize on this imperialist movement that they've got going on. And he's got this dream of building this canal in Panama. I mean, I think he kind of sees this as his big moment, as his legacy. Now, it's not like he just came up with the idea of it. Right? They've been talking about the canal since 1848. In fact, the French, around that time, were the first to start working on it. And it failed time and time again for one simple reason. Right? Down there in Central America, it's a very thin strip of land. Let's dig it up. There's our canal. But that strip of land happens to be surrounded by what? Anybody have a guess? Yeah. Giant freaking mosquitoes. All right? Giant mosquitoes. It's like a swamp down there. And so the French go down and they start to work on this canal. And they have to keep stopping because everyone's getting malaria and dying. In fact, the French lose 20,000 workers to malaria. So here comes Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt's like, screw malaria. It won't get us. We're America. And he says, look, I'll offer to buy it. The country of France they lost something like $150 million because we bought it so cheaply. But we bought it and we started working at it. And I feel like this represents this idea that Roosevelt had. There's a question on your notes that asks for you to talk about what is the Roosevelt correlate. And I love this political cartoon over here. I really feel like it does a nice job of explaining what Roosevelt's trying to do here. If you would, look at that. I'm going to turn the light off again so you can see it maybe a little bit better. But look at that political cartoon. And, can you tell that that's Teddy Roosevelt? And what do you notice? Like, what's he got right there in the forefront of the picture? What's that look like? Or a baseball bat. I heard that in the morning class. I don't know if you can read what's on the baseball bat, but Sully, you might be able to. What's it say there? Diplomacy, right? That the baseball bat is the way that we do diplomacy. Teddy Roosevelt was fond of saying that when you're dealing with other countries, you should speak softly, but carry a big stick. So the message here is to the rest of the world, this is our playground. This is our backyard. So the British, the French, anyone else, if you try to come into Panama, or for that matter, anywhere else in Central America, you're going to have to deal with us. Teddy Roosevelt, the playground bully. Right? This is our playground. So for a long time, the United States becomes the police officer of this area of the world. That's kind of where Roosevelt gets his justification for building this canal. Right? So 1903, right in the middle of the Roosevelt administration, they start to build it, and it is finished by 1914. Now, we're not going to get off easily. I said the French lost 20,000 workers. We're going to lose close to 6,000 workers. But luckily, I guess for us, a lot of those are West Indian workers. Right? We go into the Caribbean islands, we grab natives to those islands, and we put them to work in the canal zone. And it's mostly those workers who are going to die from malaria. All right, let me show you some pictures here. I got a lot of photographs from them building the canal. And, just give you a sense of what kind of work went into this. I mean, if you can imagine, you're basically digging the world's largest ditch. And it's got to be deep enough that you can get large. I mean, you're talking large tankers to get through it. You're going to have different elevations in the land, mountains, and it's going to be a chore. All right, but we've got some photographs here from the canal being built. And, again, I love my Teddy Roosevelt stories. Teddy Roosevelt wanted to see this work being done himself. And so he actually got on a ship and sailed down to Panama. He was the first president to ever leave the United States. No other president had ever left the country. So he sails down to the canal zone, and he doesn't just, look around and say, good work. He actually jumped on one of these giant earth movers and ran it for a couple hours. He loved the idea of getting involved in this. What I think is ironic is that while he's down there, he catches malaria. The guy is like, screw malaria. He caught malaria, and he almost died. But he didn't. Kind of adding to the lore here. And, talk about a success, guys. The last question, why is this such a big deal? Think about this, folks. This is going to shorten. This is going to cut the trip, the amount of time that it takes to get from East Coast to West Coast, in half. In half. To get from Japan and China to the East Coast of the United States, it's going to cut that by 40%. That's huge. Talk about economic benefits. But also, think about the military benefits. This is a huge deal. And then, there may be other countries that want to use it. Sure, come on through. You're going to have to pay us. But you can use our canal. Right? This is going to be a huge thing for the United States. And we control that territory, Panama Canal Zone, all the way up until 1999. At that point, we finally gave it back to the country of Panama. But up until that point, almost 100 years, the United States was making bank off of this canal. Ethan? No, I don't think that was part of the negotiations. There's a small tax. All right, so questions. That really does wrap it up for me. But what questions do you have? You can look at the front, look at the back, see if there's anything that need me to spend a little bit more time on. Gabby.
On number 9, remember the 2 Americans that used this style?
Who were 2 Americans who famously used?
Oh shoot, I did forget that. Yeah, I'll tell you, I didn't cover it, and I'll go back and check the exit slip. If I put it on there, I'll take the question off. That's not fair to you guys. I would say this: the 2 names are pretty well known. Pulitzer Joseph Pulitzer, and William Randolph Hearst. Okay, those are your newspaper owners. Those are the guys that are most notably going to be responsible for the yellow journalism of the time. That's on me. I apologize. Thank you for asking. Pulitzer and Hearst, William Randolph Hearst, Joseph Pulitzer. Pulitzer, I thought maybe that name might be familiar to some of you. The top award that you can get for journalism today is called the Pulitzer Prize, named after him. Okay, any other questions? Very good one. Any other questions? All right, if not, you can hold on to these. You're going to need them for tomorrow. If you're afraid you'll lose it, put it in the basket, that's fine. But you'll definitely want these for that quiz. We got some time here. We got almost 15 minutes. That time is yours. You guys can relax a little bit. I saw it, Rachel. Rachel, you're grounded.
I was really upset.
You're grounded. Not you, Rachel.
I know, I was like, did you hear it get really loud? That?
Yeah, it started to sound
We
like
had
a
to
car.
unlock it.
Oh, no.
It sounded like it was about to explode. That's why I got up and moved everything.
Did I ever tell you it makes me laugh because I was teaching about Joseph Stalin. And I said the name, Joseph Stalin, and my register just started going, rah! Really loud. He's the dictator of Russia that killed millions of people. His ghost apparently controls my furnace.